Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Brooke Mitchell, and before we begin, I have an announcement I would love to share with you all. I'm highly in tune with NatHab's conservation initiatives and the conservation community as a whole. Anytime I hear of exciting news, I'll be sure to share the information with Daily Dose listeners in the next webinar that I am hosting. On that note, NatHab Philanthropy just announced the opening of the next grant funding cycle. If you know of a grassroots conservation project with a focus on wildlife, habitat, or communities, specifically in areas where we run trips, we'd love to hear from you. So please send us an email at info@nathab.com with information about the organization and the project that needs funding. If the project is a good fit, we'll be back in touch with you and for full application details. The application deadline is September 15th. All right, everyone, back to the presentation at hand. Today's topic is Wild About Rosettes, Spotting Asia's Camouflaged Cats, presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Conan Dumenil. Thank you so much for being here today, Conan. Over to you.
Hey, thank you, Brooke, and it's good to be back. I must say hello back to our viewers again. It's been a while since I did the last webinar, but all of that is thanks to an extremely productive and an excellent, very busy season that we had in India last year. And if any of our previous travelers have tuned in for this webinar, thank you for coming to India, and thank you for tuning in again. This series of webinars that I've been doing now started a few months ago, where I thought, let me talk about more about ecology and conservation, and sort of delve into a little bit more than sort of the conversations that we constantly have while we're on safari or or on a trip. And as you would know, since we have people coming from all over and such high levels of interest, often a lot of these the topics that I've been choosing have been prompted by questions that we receive from you. So something beyond your traditional safari or wildlife watching experience, and delve a little bit into ecology and the science of really what happens behind. And so today I'm going to talk to you about camouflage, some of the quotes, why it works, and very specifically about three cats that we have in India. And while it says while about rosettes, we'll talk about spots and rosettes, and some patterns that we see. And these are the three cats that we're going to be talking about today: the Indian leopard, a clouded leopard, and the snow leopard as well. Now, for those of you who have not seen mine, allow me a quick introduction. I've been working with NatHab since 2015. Been guiding trips all across India, Nepal, and Bhutan. And well, life as a safari guide is quite fortunate. We have a lot of opportunities to observe animals in the wild, and that's something which I like to. That I'm personally drawn to, is not just going out, seeing them, and photographing them, but also trying to understand a little bit about the behavior, the habitat they live in, the fragility of the ecosystem that's around us, and what we can do in order to ensure their survival. Now, most of our work in India is safari based. Of course, we also do places where we go out for walks, and we have various multi activities to engage with nature and the wildlife. And like I mentioned a little earlier, is that often many of these things is good fodder for having these sort of in-depth discussions like we're going to have today. And but before I start talking about India, I want to go back and give you a little setting, because this story of today actually starts in Africa. And a little more than a month ago, I was in Kenya with my family. You can see the picture there. And we were out in the Masai Mara, of course, being exposed to the wonderful abundance of wildlife that we have here in Africa. And while we were out there, looking at the vistas, clicking pictures of the animals around there. Of course, we've always wanted to see cats, and as a family, I think we are cat lovers. We don't have one at home, but we like the wild cats, right? And so both my wife and my son, who's 7, we set out on our quest to see cats, and we were, of course, blessed with beautiful lion sightings. And my son wanted to see a cheetah, and that was his only singular goal that he had in Africa, and we did. And for me, the highlight of the entire trip was a cat that I kind of half expected to see, and that was the serval, which you see right at the bottom of your screen. And this is a small cat, relatively less sort of sought after than the bigger cousins, so to speak. But for me, that sighting made me jump for joy. And so while we're going through these safaris and looking at all of these things, my son actually asked a question, and he was like, "Dad, why do cats have spots?" And like a good parent and a good naturalist, I said, "Now that's a good question." Of course, I didn't have the answer at the top of my head, but one would think, and as I explained to him, that spots and patterns are really important. It's an important survival instinct because it helps the animal, sort of blend into surroundings. And then we began to think, I spent most of my time here in Asia, and we used to forest ecosystems, we used to, jungles, we used to, swamps and grasslands, not so much grasslands like we have in Africa. But, so one would think when you see animals there, the kind of coloration or the pattern that they have is kind of well suited for that. So here we were sitting out looking at these massive plains across the Mara and thinking, so what possibly could a spot or a rosette pattern have to do with something that's flat and open? Lions we can understand, yeah, plain coat, same sort of tan as the dry grass. But what do spots or rosettes actually do? And why is this, working in Africa? So begin to think, how does it work? And then so our minds traveled, our discussion also traveled. And then my son and I, we started discussing about other cats. And we did a sort of a mental count as to cats that have these patterns. And so it's not restricted to a few, but actually a large number of wild cats, both large cats and smaller cats across the world, have some sort of pattern. Now, in India, we're all too familiar with the tiger. It is the largest predator we have, and a beautiful coat, beautiful patterns, and it's the only striped, well, predominantly striped one that we have. But then when we sort of started looking, actually all across the world, there are cats to be found that have these spots or rosettes. So I found this very interesting graphic. It's by a cartoonist from India actually, who's done a poster, and these are all the wild cats across the world. There are about 40 species of cats across the world, wild cats. And just a cursory glance at these two posters will show you how many of them are actually patterned. And when you look I mean, you look closely, then you'll also notice that how many of them actually have spots or rosette patterns on them. And there's probably, you can count on one hand the number of cats that do not have any pattern as such. And when you go back, so small cats we know come in a great variety and diversity. And even when you look at the larger cats, you'll notice that out of the what 9 that are considered the large cats, I mean, and again the jury's out on this one. It's constantly debated, but let's not go into that. That's an argument or discussion for a different time. But out of the 9 larger cats, except for the lion and the puma, all of them are patterned, and except for the tiger, all of them have some sort of spot or rosette pattern. So, excuse me, this got me wondering. So when I came back home, I did a little bit more research as well, and saying, so what happens, why there's so many patterns? And obviously we know it is a survival or evolutionary trait that contributes to success, because there's such a prevalence of it worldwide. So what could it be? And then when digging into sort of the evolution of things and looking at the ancestors, a common ancestor, Uh, the pseudo is actually considered the wild ancestor for all of the cats that we have today. 37, now 40 species, because species have been split. Um, and then we see a lot of them actually sort of started diverging between 9.5 to about 8.5 million years ago. And if you look at the graphic on the right section, there's a whole sort of chunk of them. You see, about 8 million years ago, all descended from the ocelot ancestor. And all of these cats that you see here are spotted cats or roseted cats. And there might be one or two in the other categories as well, but you definitely see a large one, and mostly the mid-size or the smaller cats you see have that pattern. And in fact, if you look at the picture on our left, you'll know that, or you'll see that the cat there, the ancestor, the Pseudoelurus, is actually got some spots on it. Now, you would think, okay, so smaller cats evolved to have more spots, so the smaller or the larger cats also seem to be spotted. So there is obviously some logic to this. There's something that is proved successful, that it is now prevalent so far. And most of these cats, if you see, and if you're all too familiar with the leopard and the lion coexisting, or in the Asian context or Indian context, the leopard and the tiger existing coexisting together. And you see, while one of them occupies the role of the apex predator, it's the second, or the one that is the step below it, that is more elusive, that it uses its coat well to blend in, to stalk prey, and also to remain camouflaged from the other animals. So so let's dig into this a little bit and understand. So what do we know about rosettes? And I'm going to use this word quite often today. What is a rosette? Well, simply put, it is a rose-like pattern. We are all familiar with these patterns. It ranges from everything from we see rosettes everywhere, in right from bathroom tiles to cookies, and of course on a lot of cats. Now, technically speaking, when we say rosette, the leopard is the prime example for a rosette. And if you look at a close-up shot of the coat here, there is actually a darker brown spot on sort of the light tan coat, surrounded by about four or five, or sometimes more, blacker spots that cluster together to form this flower, or almost a rose-like pattern on it. And so when you look at it from a distance, it might look like a big blotch or a patch. And many animals, each individual animal has its own pattern. Each individual species has its type of pattern, and these, of course, vary quite a bit based on the habitat it's in, the geographical distribution, and, like I said, individual to individual. But when you look at it, excuse me, obviously, yes, this is known to work in the real life situation, when I mean, for strategies of hunting and so on. But what is it that um, makes the rosette so important? What makes it so successful? Now, we as humans, because we have color vision, we're all often looking at things through color. But if you look at it from a pure pattern, or from a pure textural point of view, like you see the little image that I have at the bottom right of the screen, when you break it down to the geometry, it is almost like an optical illusion. So you have two layers imposed on each other. You have a spotted layer, and then you have a sort of a more spread out geometrical pattern on top. And imagine these two layers on top of each other, and when you move, it creates an illusion. Now, we know cats are excellent at camouflage. I mean, they're excellent hunters, and camouflage is one thing. Even looking at a plain colored lion in harsh light in the grass, all you can see now, here's a shadow, and it is very, very easily disappeared. Um, so, it's kind of counterintuitive to think something that's brightly colored, like, a yellow or a tan yellow leopard with these black spots, you think that's going to stand out amongst the green foliage of the trees, or, or the grass. But surprisingly, and any of you who have been on safari, and if you try to take pictures of animals while they're moving, we know there's certain difficulties with that, because we often can't. and our eyes are subjective. We are looking, we can find the animal, and every time you put the camera up to to your eye, you know that the camera is searching because it's not subjective, and it can't find the animal. And I took this picture a couple of years ago, and I thought it perfectly kind of illustrates the point that I'm making. This is from one of our Nepal trips. This is in Chitwan National Park, and you see this leopard sitting there in the green or the camouflage. I mean, and his camouflage may not be so apparent at the moment, but still, it takes a bit of effort to find the leopard in there. And of course, if you're just driving past in your jeep, you're never going to see it. But if you look at it, and again, this is where I think as humans we have to get out of a trichromatic vision that we have and think of it from the perspective of a herbivore. Now, a lot of herbivores don't see the prey species of these animals don't see the same color spectrum that we do, right? They are limited. Most of them have dichromatic vision, and which also helps them distinguish some plants from the others which to eat. But they can see hue, they can see its saturation, they can see contrast, they can see a brightness as well. And I think this is where the pattern on that coat comes into play. So same image, watch it when we make it dual tone. It almost disappears. Now, this may not be a true representation of what a herbivore is seeing, but it's just two colors right here, and it'll happen the same thing if you do it in black and white. The animal almost disappears, and this is where we see the absolute efficacy of these coats and how I mean how it gives these animals an advantage, either as a predator or even as something as an animal trying to stay away, probably in this case, trying to stay away from the tiger that we saw in the area earlier. But so he's just completely sitting there at the side of the road in a bush, just trying to stay out of uh, notice of any other thing that is there. So we see predators using rosettes to stimulate different kind of shifting of light patterns. So here it's a play on shadow and shade, and this of course helps the animal remain hidden. And like I said earlier, many of these animals, depending on the habitat and the terrain they live in, these rosette patterns can change. And as we go into this presentation later, you'll see some of the different examples that we're talking about. Now, let's switch over from kind of the establishment, the foundation that we wanted to give you on this, and then look more in depth at the cats that we have in India, because it is a subject that I also personally love talking about. Um, it is sought after. Many people come to India to see our large cats, and it's got the highest density of cats anywhere in the world. So India has about 15 species of wild cat that we have here, and probably more than, if at the top of my head, I think probably more than even Central South America that we have, and they're found across a variety of habitats. A lot of our trips that NatHab runs into India, we have a chance of seeing three out of all of these cats. And there are options to go and see another four or five more. Yes, so we've got everything ranging from the Bengal tiger to our smallest cat, which is the rusty spotted cat, and that's even smaller than a domestic cat. It's about the size of a kitten. Very nocturnal animal. Also has spots and rust-colored spots. So we will look at three cats in detail here. I chose these three because not only are they iconic, but some of them are so rare that just the chase to see these animals is the thrill in itself. And I must confess, uh, out of these three that we're going to talk about, I have only seen two. One of them was more recently, and the third one still remains elusive. And hopefully, I'll get a chance this lifetime to see one. And I'm going to be talking about it with much excitement when we go on. So we will talk about these three leopards here: the snow leopard, the clouded, and the Indian leopard. Now, before we start talking about them specifically, I'd like to take a step back, a sort of more bird's eye view, to understand. the Indian landscape first, and then it'll also highlight the importance of or the niches these cats live in. Now, India is about 3.3 million square kilometers in area, and we have everything ranging from swamp grasslands to the high Himalayas to smaller mountain chains, massive river valleys, mangroves, deltas, and tropical islands as well. And so it's a varied landscape and situated in a small landmass, which is why India is often referred to as the subcontinent. So, India, with its neighbors, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, is referred to as the subcontinent because of all this diversity in the landscape that we have in a very small area. Now, there is about 980 odd protected areas that we have in India. There are various classifications for these protected areas. We come under national parks. We have about 51 tiger reserves. Those are national parks dedicated to the conservation of our flagship species, the tiger. And totally that covers about 171,000, close to 172,000 square kilometers. Now, which may seem a lot, but when you translate it to actual landmass, it's only about 5% of our national territory. And I'm telling you this now because the conversation that we'll have later on puts this into perspective. Now, moving on. So amongst this landscape, like I said, it's very varied. We will move northwards to the high Himalaya, right there. If you see at the top of the map, on the kind of junction where the Himalayas, the Karakoram meet, this is an average elevation of about 11,000 feet, and this is the home of the snow leopard. Now, this has remained one of the most elusive cats in the world, which is why I'm talking about it first. But it's also, just to tease you a little bit, it's also a cat that can easily be seen in India. When I say easily, of course, yes, it requires some effort. But to give you some perspective, we've been running trips to see the snow leopard since 2022, and every trip has come back successful. So if you're thinking, oh, it's too difficult, will I ever get to see a snow leopard in my lifetime? Contact the office, and they'll be happy to tell you about our leopard trip that runs during the winter season in India, starting in December. Uh, so this is a landscape, a district that we call Ladakh. Now, Ladakh is in the Trans-Himalayan region. It is snow-clad through most of the year, and of course, in March, it starts getting a little warmer. You see a lot more of the scree and the moraine and the dry sort of landscape that we see, which is sort of typifies what Ladakh is all about. So the Trans-Himalaya is actually it's a high altitude desert. So much like the steppes of Mongolia, or the Atacama Desert in Chile, though these are all high altitude, but because of the less precipitation or the very very minimal precipitation that happens, it stays dry through most of the year. And this is the zone where the snow leopards like to live in. So anywhere above 10,000 feet and above is prime habitat for the snow leopard. So in the mountains, down in the valleys, all at that elevation. And snow leopards also have one of the largest, if not the largest range of any cat in the world. I think it's something spanning about 12 or 13 countries across Central Asia is kind of the home range of the snow leopard. And even though it has such a large range, we actually know precious little um, about this animal, and a lot more. And as I was saying, over the past few years, as we've been going out more and more to see these animals, we are learning a lot of new things about what this animal does, where it lives, what kind of habitat, and kind of questioning all the older theories that some of the earlier naturalists and records have mentioned. So this is a cat that's quite versatile. It lives up in the mountains. Um, and you might think, what is it doing in these desolate, sort of barren mountains? Actually, you'll be surprised. There's a lot of prey species to be found, high altitude specialists like the ibex we see here, and watching a snow leopard take down an ibex again, just to sort of titillate your fantasy a little bit, is definitely a sight to be seen. So they stalk these animals across these rocks, often on high passes, and then observe them from a height, and then often make the kill while they come downwards. And if you've I'm sure some of you have already checked out videos online of snow leopards making a kill. They always come downwards from a high position. Apart from the ibex, there's also other sheep there. Ibex is a mountain goat. We have the blue sheep, also known as the burrell. Very, very beautiful animal for a sheep. Has these indigo blue. When they're mature, the males have these huge horns as well. And then we also have the urial, which is a critically endangered species found only in the Indus Valley section in the Himalayas. So they live in small pockets, and again, they travel in herds, feeding off in the valleys during the late afternoons and ascend higher up into the mountains late in the night and then come back down. Again, massive horns, beautiful. The rams are something to behold. And so they're actually very similar to your bighorn sheep that you are more familiar with in the States in terms of the bighorns, but not quite as large. So again, both of these are prey species of the snow leopard. And yes, and apart from wild, sometimes they've also been known to take domestic cattle as well. So let's talk about these guys. I mean, these chaps are they show several adaptations to deal with the cold and the mountainous environment. So they have very, very large nasal cavities. In fact, if you look at a skull of a snow leopard versus another big cat, you'll see that their muzzle is very, very short. And on an internal examination, you see that the nasal cavity is large, and this is for them to allow air to pass through channels so that it warms um, as it goes in to the lungs. They also have much smaller rounded ears, which helps minimize heat loss. Think of elephants in Africa fanning their ears, or elephants in tropical conditions, big ears, more capillaries, better regulation of heat, whereas snow leopards, small ears, prevents heat loss. And their broad paws, as you can see here, they have huge paws and often fur covered, which gives them not only balance but also traction when they're on the snow. So it's like walking with snowshoes. And the fur, they even have fur on the underside as well, which gives them the traction as they go down these steep slopes. But I think one of the coolest adaptation of the snow leopard is actually its tail. Now, it's got a tail that's about the same size of its body. As you see, it's a very fat tail, and that's because it has a lot of fat deposits in there. And so it serves two purposes. It's a sweater on cold winter evenings, and we've seen snow leopards actually cuddle up, sort of when they snuggle in together, wrap the tail around their face to help it, keep it warm when it's hunkering down for the night or hunkering down during the coldest time. But what the tail also does is it's an amazing tool when it comes down for the animal to hunt. Now it is quite flexible, and if you've not seen a video before, please go. And I think some of my colleagues have covered this in some webinars. Look at snow leopards hunt. It's amazing. You see that tail swishing from side to side, and it helps act as a counterbalance as this animal is negotiating at high speed, negotiating a downward descent onto one of its prey that is there. So when you're done, probably go look up a snow leopard hunting to see it, and you'll see that tail in action. And it's got a tail like no other cat. Yes, we all know cats have long tails, but this one is truly, truly um, different and remarkable. Now, this snow leopard is being such an elusive animal there, that often, and this pattern is so well camouflaged. And if you look at this in this habitat, even though it's out on bare rock, and this is a heavily zoomed in picture. If I remember rightly, this picture was taken through a spotting scope, so it's heavily zoomed in, it's heavily cropped. But imagine looking at this, quarter of a mile or half a mile away, you see this animal that completely blends even into the rock, and it's got this grayish white coat. So even if it's on the rock, so even in the whitest of snow, you'll see it sort of blend in, and which is why the locals in this area call it the shan, which basically means the ghost of the mountains. And if you've been on a snow leopard trip, you know that crackle on the radio when everyone says shan shan, you know the excitement that brings, because it truly is a special sight. Even our spotters and we as expedition leaders as well get super excited when we see the a glimpse of one. But truly is a remarkable animal, completely blends in with its habitat, comes and goes without anyone knowing. Um, but sometimes they do come and make their presence felt. And one of the biggest issues with dealing with the conservation stories of snow leopards today is the fact that they have been persecuted as cattle lifters. Now, one of the biggest threats to the snow leopard, of course, we all talk about climate change. We know things are changing. The world of the snow leopard is changing, and I'll get to that in just a sec. But they have been known, to sort of decimate entire flocks of sheep. This picture was from an animal that went into a sheep's pen. Now, understand that these people who are sheep are their livelihood. They're not large farmers. They usually have 20 or 30 heads of sheep, and that's all they have. And sometimes when a snow leopard gets trapped in a pen, it will, out of that reaction and out of that stress, actually kill all the sheep, even though it may or may not even eat them sometimes. So it will kill it all if it finds trap. And this, so you can imagine an entire family being a livelihood being wiped out in one night, with the snow leopard coming in there. So it may be a beautiful animal to look at. And in Ladakh, where people actually respect animals very, very much, they are Buddhist by nature, so they believe in tolerance, they believe in non-violence. But talking with these families, sometimes you can't help but feel the pain when they say, "Oh, an entire flock of sheep got decimated in the night." And because these sheep were usually in open pens, and they keep the sheep and goats in open pens because it helps for better wool production rather than keep them indoors. And so one of the so you, very, very vulnerable at that time. Um, so one of the main conservation efforts has actually been working with the snow leopards is a very, very low cost system where people have been, organizations such as the Snow Leopard Trust, working with the WWF and so on. We have been able to look at providing people with simple netting or techniques in which to revamp their pens or renovate their pens and keep it snow leopard free. Now, like I said, these pens have to be open, so they remain open to sky, but a simple mesh on the top actually helps safeguard. And this we've seen more and more often now in the landscape. And again, this is another trip um, to come on and to speak to people and understand, because we spend a lot of time with the local community there, talking to them and understanding. And this really truly gives you an understanding of what the people and how they've been living their lives for centuries without change, and also their tolerance to these animals and tolerance to loss, and how we're able to coexist together. And it's a wonderful example when we're talking about conservation in India, because we have a huge population as well as wildlife as well. So that's often in conflict with each other, and this is a wonderful example of it. Now, so leaving the snow leopard, we move further eastward into a junction where four countries meet, and this is the Eastern Himalayas. And the place here we're talking about is Singalila. These are sort of mid altitude or lower altitude, or often called the foothills of the Himalayas, but they're moist deciduous forest and moist rainforest in some places as well. And this is the home of the phantom of the forest called the clouded leopard. Now, if you thought the snow leopard was elusive, the clouded leopard even more so. I know, and I can count the number of people on one hand that have seen a clouded leopard out in the wild in India. It is a fantastic animal once we know. I mean, once we get to know it better, of course, and it's got this remarkable coat. And as you can see here, sitting in this moist forest, the little dappled light and that coat just perfectly seems to mimic that. And this was a photo taken by a friend who lives nearby, and he's one of the very few people I've seen who's actually seen it out and got actual footage of a snow leopard, sorry, of a clouded leopard out there. Now, the clouded leopard lives in species-rich forest. The Eastern Himalaya is one of the biodiversity hotspots in the world. There's tons of prey to feed on, and this is a much smaller cat, so they feed on much smaller prey. You're looking at animals such as the muntjac, which are very shy but also very fast. So you have to be super agile for these animals. They are excellent climbers, so they often climb into trees and take species of monkeys, such as this pig-tailed macaque here. They also sometimes feed on red pandas and pheasants as well. So, uh, so this animal is very versatile. It can hunt on trees, it can hunt on ground, and like I said, I think one of the coolest characters of them is their ability to climb. Now, this is, and we were having this discussion before we opened the webinar, where Brooke and myself. It's, the jury's still out whether this is a large cat or it is actually a medium-sized cat. For the purpose of this conversation, let's call it the smallest of the large cats, because some of its behavior is so much like a large cat, even though in size they're much smaller. A clouded leopard's only about 25 to 50 pounds, but they have one of the biggest canines for an animal. They have one of the biggest, strongest bite forces, uh, which they can produce with those small canines. And it's only about for the animal that size, the canine's almost 2 inches long. And so you imagine a cat's head about that big, with 2 inch really sharp canines with that bite force, which is why scientists actually call them the kind of the living descendant of the saber-toothed tiger. And you can imagine, so the animals like this can take down prey a lot larger and heavier than themselves. Um, because cats, as you know, like to strangulate or force the prey down. So that's where those canines and that openability of the jaw. So it can almost, they have quite shallow joints. The jaw is one of them where they can open it up really wide. Also, going back to its climbing, they have very shallow sockets in their feet. So if you've seen clouded leopards in a zoo, you'll often find you can see them hanging upside down from branches like a little monkey. They can climb down backwards from a tree, and this is because of the ability to rotate their ankles almost 180 degrees backwards. So, an extremely agile cat, an extremely beautiful cat, and this is the one, which is really high on my list, which I would like to see sometime, hopefully sometime this year or maybe the next, but sometime soon. I mean, it lives in wonderful habitats. And when you talk about conflict, the snow leopard, because it's so elusive, sorry, the clouded leopard, because it's so elusive and so shy, it very rarely comes into contact with the humans. But unfortunately, as humans, our impacts are far-reaching and affects the place in which the clouded leopard stays. And one of the biggest threat that we've seen to the clouded leopards is habitat loss. Now, there are two species of clouded leopards across the world. We have the mainland, and then you have the Javan or the Sunda clouded leopard, which is found in Java, and it's separated by sea, of course. So two subspecies, and both places, unfortunately, because the needs of developing nations, they are suffering because of habitat loss. So a lot of forests are cleared for timber, to feed industrialization, to feed human needs, and that results in the prime forest land being wiped out for this, cultivated, and something that the clouded leopard has to live in. They don't much like other specialists. A lot of animals have, some are generalists, and we'll meet a generalist later on, but most animals are specialists to a particular niche, to a particular habitat they're in. And the moment that habitat starts changing, and most often that change is exacerbated by human influence, the moment that habitat starts changing, we notice that the animals don't do so well and often result in the decline or, if not, extinction. Another threat to the clouded leopard is also poaching. Um, there's been lots of reports around Southeast Asia where these animals are poached for that wonderful pelt that we saw, and even till day it still exists. It goes on. In fact, I was reading recently that that there are some farms even to farm clouded leopards that to feed this industry. So it is an industry, and that causes the direct impact on these animals. And I think it is important for us to know about it and talk about it, so that we ensure the survival of these animals through our actions that we take or decisions that we make. Now, because it's such an understudied animal and it lives in such remote habitat and terrain, there is very little that we know about the clouded leopard. Most of the things that we know come from camera trap images, and these are long-term studies. You see, there could be several variations. There could be different subspecies available across, and so little is known about them and their habit. And this is, I think, probably the biggest challenge to conservation is knowing what they do, how they hunt, how they live, how they go about their day to day, and what can we do that ensures their survival in the wild. So there are agencies that support cloud leopard conservation. In fact, one of our trips that goes into Borneo actually has not only has a good chance of seeing the cloud leopard, but we'll also talk about conservation of a particular habitat and some of the flagship animals that live in there, such as the orangutans and the cloud leopard, and so on. Um, Moving on to probably my favorite animal. I don't know why this is, but ever since I was a young child, I've always been fascinated with leopards. Uh, Unfortunately, leopards don't get the same sort of respect as tigers in India do, or lions in Africa. In fact, I've tested this several times with many guides and visitors. Or we talk about this, like, oh, okay, guys, did you see? How was your trip? And they're like, oh, we saw this tiger, it was beautiful. Oh, and there was also a leopard. And I was like, what? A leopard? I did a brief count. I've probably seen, for every four tigers I've seen in India through my years guiding, I've probably seen one leopard. So it is definitely more elusive. Yes, there are places in the country which have some fantastic leopard sightings, but overall speaking, it's not an animal that you see very often. But it is an animal that is there, and often you would find traces of leopards anywhere. I mean, I found traces of leopards just outside my city. In fact, there was a leopard a few years ago caught on CCTV camera, and you regularly see this across cities. Bombay, our financial capital of India, Mumbai, has one of the highest densities of leopards living in a small location. And this is a camera trap image from that city. And you can see city lights behind one of the densest human populated places on the planet, probably the densest. And then it has a high density of leopards as well. And I think this is what makes this cat cool and why it's survived all the way up to the 21st century, and not just survived but also thrived very well because of its ability to live in a variety of habitats. Yes, we are there, found in most jungles and most forests across India. We've seen them in cities. We've seen them in degraded landscapes where rural area meets forest, and we've also seen them out in fields as well. In fact, there are many leopards, and if you look at the picture on the top right, there are many leopards that has never seen a forest or a jungle in its life. They're born and raised in fields. This is a sugarcane field, a very common sight across most of central and western India, where agencies often have to go and rescue cubs because when it comes to harvesting season, you don't want an angry mother around. So there are leopards, and they live across a variety of habitats. Off late, we've actually even seen them up in snowline. This this is a picture taken, I think, just a few years ago by an Indian wildlife photographer, and it's amazing that we've seen them. They're highly resilient, highly adapted cats. That now seeing them up at the snow line as well. Um, but like I mentioned earlier, they don't just adapt, but they also thrive very well. Count the number of leopards in this picture. This is a site from a particular location in the western part of India. These are old quarries, granite hills with temples, surrounded by villages and farms, and and is one of the best places to see leopards in India. We've seen families. We've seen extended families live together, a couple of litters together, and to see one is such a treat. But when you see a family of leopards of five or six together, oh my gosh, it's unparalleled excitement. Elation is the word I would use there. But you see them living there absolutely at peace. The communities that live around respect these animals. They give them the space. The animals will take the odd, I mean, apart from the wildlife around the area, but they might take an odd dog or a goat or someone. But it's amazing when you speak to the communities. They talk about tolerance, and they talk about karma, and they talk about the whole circle of life, and how losing one goat is kind of nothing in the greater scheme of things. um, but apart from that, on a regular basis, leopards are very agile, so they can take down large prey such as a deer, almost as heavy as themselves. But they're also very efficient at taking monkeys in the forest. And if you are on wildlife safari in India, and we're tracking animals, you'll note that, and I've heard a lot of guides also say this, that monkeys have very, very specific calls for leopards. So animals, herbivores, will give you indication that the predators around. We call them alarm calls or distress calls, and monkeys have a very, very specific one for leopards. And often you'll see them very, very excited because they know the leopard can get up that tree very, very fast. Like I said, they have a varied diet. This is a scene where you'll often find around rural areas and even in cities. Mumbai, the city of Mumbai, there is so much CCTV camera footage available on the internet now, where you see leopards coming in, taking up pet dogs, and so on, in apartment buildings. So they are extremely resilient. They're extremely elusive as well, and they can get in and get out without anyone knowing. I've seen leopards cat just outside my home city, comprising entirely of beetles. So, when I guess when push comes to shove, they will eat anything. And I can just imagine a leopard digging through, under a rock or something just to get, a nice stash of beetles. I mean, there were whole beetle exoskeletons completely in the poop. So they'll eat anything. Mammals, birds, peacocks are regular prey as well. Whatever they can get their hand on. Highly, highly resilient. And when it comes down to court and adaptations of where they live, they've also shown a lot of variation in their coat. Of course, everyone knows the Black Panther, made famous by in Jungle Book, Bagheera, as he was called. Bagheera is the Hindi word for leopard or panther, and it is a wonderful sight. We've seen a lot of black leopards, which is the same cat really. It's just a recessive gene that contributes to this high form of melanin, which makes it looking almost black. But if you look closely, you can still see the rosette patterns in the animal. And we've seen a high concentration of this in the southern part of India, in the Malayan Peninsula, parts of eastern India, into Burma as well. And I think about 11% of leopards, approximately 11% of leopards, show a high degree of melanism. There is also another form where the rosettes seem to kind of mingle with each other, forming a much larger blotchy pattern, as you see the one at the bottom right of the screen. And then you also have the golden form of a leopard, which there's very little black in it. In fact, no black at all. It's more dark brown, and a much, much lighter tan. Again, all of these are genetic mutations, in them, which gives these color codes. And some of them become dominant, like we see in the ones in southern India. Definitely has a dominance of the black gene, where we see a lot of the leopards in the Western Ghats and western part of India with that coat. And it's interesting, it may look all black like it does in the picture, but if you look closely, or if you get them in good light, then you'll actually see it's got the rosette pattern on them. And part of the coat again, unfortunately, such a lovely coat is also been their undoing um, for centuries, because I mean, leopards were hunted. Uh, the coats were used a lot to make, well, dressing and fashion. Bones and teeth and whatnot were still used in Chinese medicine, and they're traded a lot still. But I think the biggest threat that leopards have, and like I mentioned earlier, when you have a country of 1.4, 1.3, 1.4 billion people, there is not a lot of room for wildlife to roam. And we have a high density of wildlife and an even higher density of humans. So one of the constant problems leopards face today is because of the also variety of habitats they live in. It's constantly coming into contact with humans, and you can understand the fear, mob frenzy. You don't know what to do. An animal is there, you feel threatened, and most cases, this situation, this encounter, does not end up very well for the leopard. This is a picture that we are so used to seeing ever so often in India, is where a leopard is strayed into a village, and you got the whole mob in either trying to drive it away, or sometimes even capture it and kill it. So it is a real problem that we're having. It exists. It is something that we have to talk about. And part of all the things that we guides also do is, when we go to places, is speak to communities. There are many organizations as well working with man human human animal conflict, and education probably plays the biggest role here, in understanding what an animal does, how to deal with it, and the importance of it in the larger scheme of things. So that's sort of the story of the three rosetted cats that we have here. Of course, there are a lot more cats to talk about. There are smaller cats such as the leopard cat, the fishing cat, the rusty spotted cat, all of them with beautiful, beautiful markings. But unfortunately, because of time in this webinar, I've chosen to speak only about three. But before I head off and open the room for questions, just throw a few facts there. India is the only place, like I said, where you can see all of these three big cats together. In fact, it's a place where you can get lions, and in a couple of years, when it opens, cheetahs as well. So if you want to see large cats in the wild, India is your place. And there is one place in India where you can see all three cats together in one location. It's a very difficult terrain. This is park in the far east of India, which is very difficult to get to. Also, it's fairly removed, but it has an altitude variation right from the lowlands all the way to the snow-capped peak. So about 3,500 meters, and potentially, if one were to visit and spend enough time, you could see all three of these cats, including tigers as well. Now, going back, just a few facts. Just if you're one who like these little tidbits of information, leopards are the most widely distributed of cats. 13,000 leopards in India is our official count. We feel there could be a lot more than that remain uncounted, and areas that are not forested. There's probably twice that amount, if not 2.5 times amount of that. Um, there is the rosettes we spoke about being unique to each individual. These are almost like individual fingerprints, and vary from animal to animal. Now, amongst all of these three cats, the leopards of course are the largest. They can go anywhere between they can get to about 140, 70 to about 140 pounds. Males are of course much larger than the females. The snow leopards are slightly smaller. That's also because of their build. They're much more stockier. They have shorter legs, as you see in this image, and much closer to the ground because they need that center of gravity while hunting. And they again between about 40 to about 100 pounds, so just slightly lighter than a leopard. And of course, the smallest of all these cats, the smallest of all the large cats, is the clouded leopard. But in terms of proportion, like I said, what the clouded leopard loses in size, it definitely makes up with that attitude and the hardware that it has. So I'd just like to close with this slide and just saying that we talk about human influence on animal habitat, we talk about climate change, we talk about our influence and how it's changing the planet. And these two images, I think, typically signify this is we've seen, and I spoke to you about animals that occupy a niche territory. They're well suited for one. Some are more general than others, but when these zones start changing, then the animals are forced to adapt. And unfortunately, not all of them can adapt given the rate of change that is happening. Picture of a snow leopard on our left here. It's obviously moved down from its habitat. This is seen at under a range that it usually is known to habitat. This is again in moist forest in the eastern part of India, and it's almost at 2,500 meters, so way below its average minimal height. And here on the right, in contrast, we've got a leopard that has moved up and beyond its regular habitat and living close to the niche in which a snow leopard occupies. So these boundaries between where these two animals normally wouldn't share is now becoming more fluid. It's now becoming more diluted because of the change that is happening on our planet. And yeah, so I mean, I would like to say is, I think part of why the reason why I like doing these talks as well, it gives me a chance to speak to you as well. And, even when we're out traveling, give a chance to have these discussions, because at the very least, if you're going to talk about conservation or ensuring that all living beings have a space on the planet, at the very least, we have to understand them first, understand where they live, what kind of habitat they need, what is our influence on them. Once we understand about them, then grows an appreciation and affection, which hopefully translates into the preservations of these beautiful, beautiful cats in the wild. So I'd like to say thank you at this point. I love talking to you about it. I'd like to hand it back to you, Brooke, to open the field to hear from our viewers if you have any questions, and I'll be happy to answer them if I can.
Oh, that was so good. You had me completely captivated. And before we started, I was just talking about how badly I wanted to see a snow leopard, and you just made it 10 times worse, Conan. So thank you, but no, thank you. So we have so many great questions here, and everybody, please go ahead and submit them. I will try to get through a few here. I know we're already running up to the top of the hour, but if you have a couple more minutes, I definitely do. So let's just dive in here. We do have lots of snow leopard questions, so I'll just stay on that topic. So this is a great question here. So one of our travelers said that they just saw a pair of snow leopards and they were wondering about the hunting style. So some cheetahs hunt together, the males hunt together, and the females are solitary. Do snow leopards have the same hunting style, or are they all solitary, or how does that work with males versus females?
Yes, to all. So yeah, I think what current wildlife watching, or the hobby of watching animals in the wild, what that has contributed is it has contributed a lot of knowledge to the sphere of natural history that we thought we knew about. And if you recall, I said, we as guides are actually learning a lot about these animals from watching them often, compared to what the literature you had to refer to earlier. And we've seen that a lot of things are actually not absolute. When we talk about tigers, people say, oh, they're solitary. Snow leopards are meant to be solitary, but on a day-to-day things, these things are they're very fluid. They're not Absolute. Yes, there are some animals like lions. For no, we know they have a social structure. They live in a hierarchy. But some animals that are traditionally solitary, we've seen them pair up. We've seen snow leopards, mother and cubs pair. If the cubs are too young, usually the parents like to leave the cubs back because they can blow the hunt. But we've seen courting pairs hunt together, and sometimes even siblings. It's a little hard to tell with snow leopards because most of the time we actually see them far away, and not a lot is known about how they overlap in territory. So we don't know. Sometimes it could be two unrelated individuals, but because of the harshness of the terrain and because of the availability of food, sometimes will have to cooperate with each other to hunt. Or these could also just be siblings from a litter or share the same parent that are actually cooperating, like we often see with cheetahs in Africa do that. So yes, yes, yes to everything. Everything is possible. I think if you look at it, everything comes down to the availability of resources and the amount of effort it requires to get a prey. So we've seen animals make decisions based on these things. So whatever is easier, apart from expending a lot of energy, something that's easy, sometimes that will get you through this slim times. We've seen animals make decisions pairing up or moving on to their own depending on the time. So I hope that kind of answers that question you had.
Yes, it's so much more fluid than we previously thought. I definitely love how camera traps and that form of science has taught us all a lot. Yeah, I definitely have studied a lot of big cat behavior. So I have many questions here asking the difference or similarities between Indian leopards and African leopards. Are they related? Are they not? Or just, yeah, could you explain maybe the difference between them and the similarities? I think we would all love to learn more.
Sure, sure. So okay, again, this is something where the jury is out because I've heard two conflicting theories about how an animal is actually classified as a species and how an animal is classified as a subspecies. Now, you can read up on both if you like. Now, typically, where leopards are considered, they're all Panthera pardis. So that's genus and species across Africa and Asia. The Indian leopard is considered a subspecies, Panthera pardis fuscus. The African leopard, scientific name defeats me at the moment, but right now we've got several subspecies across the world that has been classified based on mainly the variation or the isolation in geography or how apart they are from geography, and also some physical traits as well. Now, earlier, if you see the more traditional way where animals were classified, it was usually on based of physical traits. In fact, they used to think the black panther was a separate species, but it is not. It's actually just a melanistic form of a leopard. But no, now with genetic studies and studying specific genes, and then you look at the pattern on how much variation is within a gene and how much similarity is between a gene, then that's what opens the room to discussion of whether this is a species or this is a subspecies. Now, if you look at it physically or morphologically, there isn't much difference between all the subspecies of leopards that we have across the world. So that's African, that's Indian, Sri Lankan, Southeast Asia, I think has two species. You have the Amur leopard. So there's about, I think, if I remember rightly, about 7 or 8 species of leopards across the world. And that's also because they have a large habitat, a large spread, a large range, sorry. And some of these ranges are isolated from other places. Like, for example, a lot of the animals that we've seen kind of evolve on the island of Java because it was separated, but not too long ago, have kind of adapted very, very specific conditions which make them different from species across. So the same is with Africa and India. They would have been one species, but when the continents drift apart, um, there is some changes, and similarly with Sri Lanka and India. The larger leopards, I think the largest individual on record was actually a Sri Lankan leopard, if I remember rightly. But African leopards tend to be much larger than Indian leopards, and Sri Lankan tend to be sort of somewhere midway between the two. The Amur leopard also has a size difference and a slight variation in the coat. So the differences between all of them are very, very minute. And again, because size and some coat variation is really not the ideal thing to say that they're different. They're different enough, but a lot of it is actually based on their geography.
That's awesome. It makes total sense to adapt to where they are. This question is very good, and I would love to hear your thoughts about it. So, with recent years and recent decades, tiger and leopard populations have both increased. Has there also been an increase in conflict between the two cats?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. In fact, this is something that we talk about almost on a daily basis in India, and this is a conversation we're constantly having with visitors or anyone interested in wildlife. And I think again to put this in perspective, we've got a growing number. India has now what about 3,500 tigers, and probably this is the official count, and the official count about 14,000 leopards in a landmass sharing it with 1.4 billion people. So there is a lot, not a lot of space there. And yes, it's nice to talk about conservation. Yes, we are protecting habitat and all of that, which directly translates into an increase in numbers of these cats. And in my, just short term, sort of 20 years of guiding, I've seen, you know, back in the day when I look back when I first started to where I see now, I'm definitely seeing a lot more of these cats now than what I used to see earlier. So the numbers have visibly increased. The official numbers may be double the unofficial numbers may be even double the official numbers we have. So that lends to a lot of conflict because when numbers double, you need space. Now, if you look at the traditional sense, they talk about animals needing 40 or 50 square kilometers of space, individual animal. But in today's reality, you don't have that space. So, a home range of an animal is shrinking. Also, a lot of these animals are moving out of protected areas, and that's where the conflict often happens. A tiger crossing the road from the forest into a village, lifting cattle, and so these things happen. Yes, there's a lot of schemes in place to keep. In fact, some of the parks are actually putting up fences around. People are being educated on how to live with these animals. School kids are being taught how to kind of relate with the animals that are in their own backyard. Animals are being translocated if they stray out. New parks are being formed. New areas are being formed. So all of these are sort of mitigation measures in which you can deal with the human-animal conflict. But I think the biggest measure of them all is definitely awareness. It's nice for us to sit here across a computer screen and talk about conservation, but for someone who's lost a family member or someone who's lost their source of livelihood, it's a different conservation altogether. And I think that's where it's important to be had, is to understand that, there is a purpose for everything in life. These animals are there for a particular reason. What can we do as humans to actually reduce the burden on us? Because you really can't hold an animal accountable. There isn't much you can do beyond a point. But as humans, what we can do, and these are questions we should ask ourselves, and where we should ideate and come up with strategies and how we're going to look at a future where both humans and animals live together.
Oh, could not agree more. That's definitely why I'm here doing what I'm doing, and I know that's why you're here doing what you're doing. So I could talk to you about cats all day, but we don't have all day. I'm sure a lot of people would love to go about the rest of their day. So, Conan, I would love to turn it back to you for any closing thoughts.
Yes, thank you, Brooke. Even I love to just talk about wildlife, talk about cats especially, and my favorite ones here. But I'm just going to leave you with this closing image. It's one of the best images I've seen of clouded leopard, again by a filmmaker, and this was set on a really complicated rig high up in the treetops. This tree. is actually about maybe about 40 or 50 feet off the ground, and this animal is up there. But again, this just goes to show the wonders of our natural world that exist around us. And I think as humans, and I'm sure all our viewers here will agree, we need to take the time out to appreciate the world and all its natural wonder, because we have just the one world. This is the world we're living in, and we have to share our space as well. So hopefully, episodes like this, forays into the wild, any information that we can consume regarding nature and natural history will help us make the right decisions on sharing this planet with our fellow beings. So thank you all once again for joining us today. Thank you. It's been fantastic speaking to you, and I hope to see you around and talk to you about more cool subjects in the coming months. So thank you, everybody, and have a nice weekend ahead.
Yes, thank you so much for the fantastic presentation today, Conan. And I'd also like to thank everybody who tuned in. Join us tomorrow for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentations, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.